It really is a phenomenon that should be studied, that normies genuinely believe that Pokemon is perpetually falling off, that nobody cares about it anymore, that it's a declining brand, that the anime is over, that nobody buys the games anymore, and yet somehow it's still the biggest brand in the world. Not by an insignificant margin. It's like 3 times bigger than like number 2 now. I feel like people really, truly, genuinely don't understand how much bigger Pokemon is than some compared to something like Star Wars or like Disney or like any of these other lesser brands. It's very, very interesting to kind of see how people like bend over backwards to deny reality, because they always do this weird thing where they're like, well, it only sells because it's Pokemon, as if that doesn't in and of itself prove Pokemon's long-term viability and success. Again, this kind of goes into what I've been saying for a while, is that Pokemon, people have this weird mindset that Pokemon is like a generic brand and that it doesn't do anything unique, exciting, or fresh, when in actuality there's really nothing else like it, and it's kind of dominating its niche of being like these kid-friendly RPGs. Essentially, it's just so much more appealing than something like Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy or D&D, and yet, like, the masses just can't bring themselves to admit it, because that would mean acknowledging that Nintendo won the console war, and we just can't have that. So what ends up happening is, in situations like this, is that people are genuinely surprised when Nintendo comes out and we're just like, yeah, we're releasing Fire Red and Leaf Green on the eShop for $20 each, right? And people flipped out. These games are old, they're tired, like, I could just emulate them, like, they come out and they start, like, ranting and raving about how other games, like, are cheaper and more affordable than Fire Red and Leaf Green, and the immediate response to that should be that those games are not as relevant or popular as Pokemon. Like, that should be the immediate response. Because I've seen a lot of people try and say that, like, well, Morrowind is cheaper than this, Red Dead 2 is cheaper than this, you can get all these, like, other games for less money, Metal Gear Solid 4, like, you see so many people, like, come out with this nonsense, and it's just like, yeah, none of that is as big as Pokemon. You will not get as much mileage out of those games as Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green. You will not come back to them like you did, like we have with Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green. Like, Pokemon is genuinely one of the best video game franchises in the world, but for some reason you have this religiously, like, fanatical group of people who are just very desperate to kind of deny reality, to kind of pretend that, like, Street Fighter is still relevant, or to pretend that, like, something like Astrobot is relevant while downplaying the biggest franchise in the world. It's embarrassing. Like, I know it's commonly known now that, like, only about 10% of Pokemon's total revenue comes from the games, but, like, again, 10% of the world's biggest media franchise. Like, what are you talking about, bro? It's like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? I am just extremely confused about the notion that, like, Pokemon is lame, or that Pokemon is too expensive, or that, like, nobody cares about Pokemon, because, like, what we're seeing is the exact opposite. And it really does need to be, like, understood that, like, no matter how many of these, how many times we see people, like, try and hype up slop, like, say, Digimon, or Temtem, or Power World, like, none of that's really coming close to touching Pokemon. Like, not even fucking close. And, we're seeing that happen in a big way, but the narrative has always been that Pokemon is this brand that's on the verge of falling off and becoming irrelevant, when, like, that's just not only is not true, that's completely and objectively wrong. It is something that we do need to talk about more, is just how big and successful mainline Pokemon games are, in spite of the constant bitching and moaning from the community. Like, that's kind of my mindset, like, looking at this, because $20 is not unreasonable. The Game Boy Advance games are reasonably priced. These are games that, like, had quite a lot of work put into them. Like, people say, like, oh, they're just ROMs, and I'm just like, they have local play. What are you talking about? They enabled local play on this thing, which was not something you could do on the Virtual Console with most games. They actually had to do a little bit of work to get the Pokemon games on the 3DS Virtual Console to be able to like trade and like to battle and like simulate that. So like again, like it's perfectly reasonable that these are $20, like for sure. But what's frustrating about this is just how so many people are like trying to say that this is like unreasonable and this is overpriced and that like Nintendo is just like embarrassing themselves. And I really don't. Not only do I not think that's true, what I think is starting to happen is that I think the Pokemon haters are starting to lose their credibility. Because like Demish makes a video saying that like I'm done with Pokemon, I'm never gonna buy Pokemon again. And what does he do? He emulates Fire Red and Leaf Green on like some shitty like Android tablet thing. Like I don't even know what it is. Something that he could have spent. Instead of like buying that shitty knockoff product, he could have just gotten the game on an actual Nintendo console. But like anyway, so like again, first of all, the stupid like emulation thing needs to stop. Like nobody cares about your emulation machine. The game is officially available on Nintendo console. That'll always be the definitive version. It doesn't matter what you do with it or what you're playing it on. Nobody cares. Okay. But second of all, and more importantly, what Demish does, he comes out and he says that like I'm never playing Pokemon again. I'm done. I've never been happier. And what does he do? He plays Pokemon on an emulator. So this kind of goes into what I've been saying for a long time about these people and why nobody takes them seriously and why nobody will ever respect them. Like, they bitch and moan about Pokemon. They go out of the way to not pay for it and to steal it and to, like, they make all these videos about how they don't want to support the brand. And then they turn around and they support the game. They play the game. And when you do it that way, you've already lost because you're kind of demonstrating to your audience that it is okay to play Pokemon, that it is okay to like the brand and to like everything Nintendo's doing because you're playing the game itself, the most important component to the game. So essentially, your audience is just going to be like, I'm going to play that too, and they're going to buy it because emulation is retarded and makes no sense. So, like, again, this is why I feel as if, like, the cope regarding emulation and, like, the Pokemon thing, why it's so going to collapse so hard, is that all of the most vocal critics of the Pokemon company, every single one of them, play an extensive amount of Pokemon. When you play a franchise that much and you have that much experience with it, like, people can't take you seriously when you try and say that, like, the franchise has fallen off or it's not successful or it's not good anymore. Like, because that obviously isn't true. Otherwise, you wouldn't have put so much time into it. Like, and that's the problem that I think the Pokemon hate community is having now, is that they're spending so much time playing and talking about these games in spite of allegedly hating them. Like, it's one of those situations where, like, no matter what the Pokemon company does, these guys will bitch, moan, and complain. But on the flip side of that, much like the Gen 1ers before them, these guys are going to be such parodies of themselves and become so stereotypical that, like, actual fans are going to start clowning on them. And that's actually what we've been seeing since ZA came out, is that we're now at the point where people make their hyperbolic bullshit videos about how the game is a complete disaster, and, like, people get a hold of it and they realize that, like, wait, the game is actually very good, With, like, these Pokemon re-releases, the narrative was that, like, Pokemon was failing and that, like, nobody was happy with it, and yet, like, it was too expensive, and yet it launches on the eShop for $20, Like, do you think most people are going to be put off by $20? No, of course not. Like, the only reason this is such a controversy is because YouTubers are making clickbait videos. Like, and not only are they making clickbait videos, they're going around behind their audience's backs and playing the games anyway. So many of these people said not to buy the Switch 2 and to wait and to say that there were no games on this thing. And the simple reality of that was they all went out and bought and played the games anyway. Bought and played the hardware anyway. And ostensibly they do this thing where they're like, oh yeah, I bought it for review purposes, or like I didn't buy it and I played it at my friend's house, or like, I just emulated it, but you're still engaging with the software. You know what I mean? You're still reviewing the product. And I do think this is why the Pretendo community has kind of like declined in relevancy in recent years. Like, we're getting to the point where people like Nintendo are straight up getting made fun of because of just how desperate they are to keep the farce going, to keep their channels relevant. Like, it's becoming more common to make fun of these kind of channels. And I do think the Pokemon hate is going to be a major cause of why this behavior is going to become such a meme. This isn't like 10 years ago where everybody was in lockstep, like downplaying Nintendo and shitting on them all the time. Like, right now, it feels more and more as if people are getting fed up with like the Nintendo criticism community. And I could not be happier.